Thank you everyone for being with us today. It's a very exciting moment for us all, and I would like now to start the formal program with the first session of our keynote speakers, and I would just provide a few opening remarks at my end. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ola Abulghaib, and I am the head of the Technical Secretariat for the UN Global Disability Fund. It's our pleasure on behalf of the fund, but also the International Disability Alliance and the International Disability and Development Consortium, to welcome everybody in the room with us today and another 300 people online. It's really a great sentiment that we are all together on the same goal for what we want to achieve. Before we start, I would like just to provide practical information that we are providing International Sign Language additional to closed captioning. But for anyone in the room who needs any additional support, please signal it to the team and they are more than happy to support. Also, I would like to say that after the end of the discussions, we would like to welcome you to the reception with some snacks and drinks. So I welcome you all to stay for that part as well. We are really incredibly excited to have you all with us today. It's an incredible moment to mark the Summit of the Future and look ahead of us. Also, looking at the momentum of the next Global Disability Summit taking place in Germany next year and beyond. This is a critical moment for us as a fund. As you can see, we are rebranding our name, and I'm very pleased to announce today our new name, which is the Global Disability Fund. We're launching our new strategy next year, which is another milestone for us to continue the ambition and commitment to support countries in their journey on disability inclusion. We know the world is changing, hopefully to the better. We know that the promise to leave no one behind and have a more inclusive development, responses and processes, and humanitarian action is all what we want to achieve today and in the future. We wanted to bring this group together to discuss what's needed to have a better impact on the ground. And I must say that I take great heart from the level of interest we managed to bring in this room. And we hope it's only the start for a better achievement together in the future. Our program is ambitious, but hopefully we can achieve it with your patience with us today. So additional to our distinguished panel, we have two interesting sessions. One of them is on inclusive financing, and the other one is discussing what do we need to be in place in terms of really putting in practice inclusive communities that are respectful but inclusive to all persons with disabilities. We know change is difficult, but we know it's possible. We witness it on the ground with all our programs. Once we come together genuinely, we can make a difference in the lives of millions of persons with disability who needs it most. We know it's a critical moment in the years coming ahead of us, starting with the Global Disability Summit in April, but also we know that the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development taking place next year in Spain is very critical to the world, but equally to persons with disabilities. And together we hope we can influence the upcoming processes for a better outcome for all of us. And I'm honored now to start the program with our distinguished speakers to present their keynote to the whole audience. I'm privileged to start with Mr. Velu Avio, Minister of Foreign Trade Affairs from Finland, to start our keynote presentations. I welcome you to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, dear partners and friends, thank you for the invitation to speak at today's event. I'm especially delighted to be here since disability inclusion is a key priority in Finland's foreign and security policy and in development cooperation. Promoting the rights of persons with disabilities is a cross-cutting objective across all our development cooperation. This means we emphasize a human rights-based approach, strive to strengthen the capacity of the disability movement and want to ensure that persons with disabilities are included in the monitoring of sustainable development goals. For instance, we have supported disability inclusion in countries like Tanzania, Nepal, and Iraq through different UN organizations. We have also worked for years to improve the inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action. We need to make sure that humanitarian aid reaches everyone, including those in the most vulnerable position. At the same time, we need to recognize persons with disabilities as key actors in humanitarian action and conflict resolution in line with the UN Security Council Resolution 2475. Furthermore, digitalization offers significant potential to advance the rights of persons with disabilities. In this regard, we have collaborated with UNICEF Learning Innovation Hub in Finland to address the global learning crisis through education technology. For example, the hub is developing accessible digital textbooks to make them available, affordable, and accessible for children with disabilities in all contexts. We expect that hub will be able to expand these solutions to several countries, reaching children with disabilities around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, the UNPRPD has a key role in supporting developing countries to implement the CRPD. Finland has funded the UNPRPD since its establishment, and we are proud to be the largest donor of this unique mechanism within the UN system. We have been very pleased to note that more partners have decided to support the fund, and we hope that the number will keep on increasing in the future. In order to plan for inclusive climate action, humanitarian response, or development cooperation, we cannot work in silos. Too often when we talk about women's participation, we fail to mention women with disabilities. Similarly, when we talk about disability inclusion, we should remember that this is a diverse group of people with each individual having their own needs and talents. One of the cross-cutting approaches of the UNPRPD is addressing gender inequality and advancing the rights of women and girls with disabilities. Finland has been a strong supporter of this objective, and we have consistently advocated for projects that address the intersections of gender and disability. Dear guests, we have gathered here to mark the Summit of the Future with the ambitious goal of delivering better present and safeguarding the future. Many of us would have wished to see the persons of disabilities feature more prominently in the Pact for the Future that is currently being finalized. But let me highlight one mention of persons with disabilities in the text. It specifically asks us to quote, ensure accessibility and disability inclusion at the United Nations to allow for full, meaningful, and effective participation and equality of persons with disabilities in all aspects of the United Nations work, quote ends. To fulfill this objective, we must continue the effective implementation of the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy. After 5 years, we have seen a lot of progress and increased awareness. Yet 67% of its targets are not met. What we need now is adequate, sustainable funding for the UNDIS team to continue their work. If the UN itself becomes more inclusive and accessible, it can be better assist member states to do the same. Ladies and gentlemen, although we are in the middle of the Summit of the Future, we must already prepare for the next meetings to come. COP29, the Global Disability Summit, and the World Summit for Social Development are around the corner. At some of these events, disability inclusion is at heart of discussion, while others might need a reminder. The best way to make the voice of persons with disabilities be heard is to bring them to the decision-making tables. Persons with disabilities and their representative organizations should be included before, during, and after negotiating processes. In Finland, we have a long tradition of consulting the civil society. Before this high-level week of General Assembly, for instance, our Minister for Foreign Affairs and I held a consultation with the Finnish NGOs to discuss our priorities for this week. We regularly cooperate with organizations of persons with disabilities, some of whom are also implementing partners of our development cooperation. I look forward for hearing your ideas on how we can shape a more inclusive future. Thank you.
your commitment to support our work. Now, I would like to welcome Ms. Irene Isambu to present her remarks. Ms. Irene will present her remarks in French, but we will have a colleague online that after she completes it, she will also briefly present it in English. So hopefully that is okay for all of us.
Mesdames et messieurs, distingués invités, je remercie les organisateurs de présentes assises pour l'opportunité que vous m'accordez de partager avec vous l'expérience de la République démocratique du Congo dans le domaine de l'inclusion sociale des personnes handicapées. Dès son accession à la magistrature suprême en 2019, le président de la République, Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, a fait de l'inclusion sociale des personnes handicapées l'une des priorités de son action en créant au sein du gouvernement central un ministère chargé des personnes handicapées et autres personnes vulnérables. Cette grande vision du président de la République a renforcé les efforts du gouvernement dans le domaine du handicap. À partir de 2019, le pays a rendu visible le budget du secteur de personnes avec handicap, alors qu'il était quasiment inexistant depuis des années. En 2022, le pays a publié son premier rapport sur la mise en œuvre de la Convention relative aux droits des personnes handicapées et initié plusieurs réformes pour répondre aux besoins d'inclusion sociale des personnes handicapées. À cet effet, le pays a harmonisé son cadre légal et réglementaire en se dotant d'une loi organique portant protection et promotion des droits des personnes handicapées. Et d'une loi, nous avons encore une deuxième loi qui crée une médaille de vaillance pour la patrie afin d'honorer tous les militaires et les policiers devenus handicapés de guerre à cause de la guerre d'agression dans la partie est de notre pays. Ces deux lois ont poussé à l'adoption de plusieurs mesures réglementaires en matière d'autonomisation et d'accessibilité des personnes handicapées. L'une des mesures importantes de ces deux lois est l'institution d'un fonds national d'appui à l'autonomisation et à l'accessibilité des personnes handicapées, ainsi que la fixation par décret du Premier ministre du taux de représentation des personnes handicapées dans les institutions publiques à 5% et de 3% pour le secteur privé. Le pays s'est doté aussi pour la première fois d'un secrétariat général des personnes handicapées pour booster la transversalité de la donne handicap dans tous les autres secteurs. En ces mois de septembre, ici 2024, nous sommes en train de finaliser le recrutement des 4 300 agents et cadres de l'État, dont 60% est composé de personnes handicapées. En dépit de tous ces efforts, la question de l'inclusion sociale des personnes handicapées demeure encore une préoccupation sur terrain à cause de plusieurs défis, que sont par exemple la persistance de cette guerre d'agression devenue la machine à fabrication des personnes handicapées en République démocratique du Congo et dans toute la région de Grand Lac en Afrique. Le faible budget alloué au secteur de personnes handicapées comparativement aux besoins sur terrain, notamment pour la lutte contre la pauvreté et la mendicité des personnes handicapées, ainsi que pour l'assistance des personnes handicapées victimes des crises et catastrophes naturelles. Et nous avons aussi les défis du faible appui des partenaires au développement dans le secteur des personnes handicapées. Mesdames et messieurs, c'est ici le lieu de souligner l'impérieuse nécessité de revisiter l'approche des financements dans le secteur du handicap, tant au niveau du pays qu'au niveau global par le partenaire au développement. Il nous faut, pour atteindre les résultats adéquats, en rapport avec l'inclusion des personnes handicapées, considérer la question sous l'angle transversal et stratégique. L'analyse des liens entre le handicap et les autres secteurs, tels que le handicap et les conflits armés, le handicap et les changements climatiques, le handicap et l'évolution technologique, démontre que la question est aussi politique, économique que seulement sociale et humanitaire. D'où la nécessité d'un investissement et allocation des ressources importantes pour répondre aux réalités et aux besoins qui s'imposent dans le domaine du handicap. Il est temps que les États et les partenaires internationaux tels que la Banque mondiale, les Nations unies et autres augmentent les financements dans le domaine du handicap à travers un mode de financement spécifique, parallèlement à l'investissement intégré, à l'instar de ce qui s'est fait pour la lutte contre les inégalités du genre et la promotion de la femme. La République démocratique du Congo salue l'institution du Fonds mondial des Nations unies qui, à travers le partenariat des Nations unies pour la promotion des droits des personnes handicapées, a appuyé les efforts de mon gouvernement, spécialement à travers mon ministère, dans le plaidoyer pour l'adoption de la loi organique portant protection et promotion des droits des personnes handicapées, ainsi que l'adoption de toutes les mesures d'application au niveau gouvernemental. À ce sujet, nous demandons l'allègement des procédures pour l'accès des partenaires au fonds au niveau local. Il est aussi important que le pays du Sud soit suffisamment impliqué en tant que gouvernement dans les discussions sur le financement des personnes handicapées. C'est dans ces pays du Sud que la pauvreté et les effets néfastes du handicap sont plus criants sur les populations, spécialement sur les femmes et les enfants handicapés. Les femmes et les enfants handicapés, ce sont des catégories qui subissent une double marginalisation. D'abord, en tant que femme ou enfant, et à cela s'ajoute l'état du handicap. Et c'est pour cela que dans le pays du Sud, nous demandons suffisamment de ressources pour que ces catégories qui sont doublement marginalisées soient prises en compte. Mesdames et messieurs, les organisations des personnes handicapées doivent aussi avoir un avis à donner dans les discussions. Ce sont elles les bénéficiaires de tous les appuis, que ce soit du niveau du gouvernement, que ce soit du niveau global. Il faut que les organisations des personnes avec handicap soient suffisamment impliquées. Enfin, nous devons aussi réfléchir sur le mécanisme efficace d'échange d'expériences dans le domaine d'inclusion sociale des personnes handicapées. Aujourd'hui, il y a des pays qui ont beaucoup évolué dans tel ou tel autre aspect d'inclusion et il y en a d'autres qui n'ont pas beaucoup évolué. Il y a nécessité de renforcer la coopération et la collaboration pour les échanges de connaissances, des opportunités et des stratégies face aux défis qui minent l'avenir de l'inclusion des personnes handicapées dans le monde. Je voudrais terminer en soulignant l'ouverture de la République démocratique du Congo à la coopération avec d'autres États ainsi qu'avec les grands regroupements mondiaux et régionaux des personnes avec handicap pour la promotion des droits des personnes handicapées. C'est pourquoi la République démocratique du Congo se propose d'accompagner et d'appuyer la participation de l'Afrique, surtout francophone, au sommet de l'Allemagne en 2025 sur les droits des personnes handicapées. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Minister Irene. Now, I would like to give the floor briefly to our colleague online, Charlotte Axelson. I hope you're still there, Charlotte, to just briefly summarize what Ms. Irene mentioned to us. I hope she's on.
Yes, I'm here, Ola. Thank you very much. Yeah, I hope you can hear me well. I'll make a brief summary of the presentation. So,
yes, please.
Ms. Irene Isambo, the Minister of Persons with Disability and Persons in Vulnerable Situations from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So the Minister was thanking the organizers and all the participants to be able to share this experience on social inclusion for persons with disabilities in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The President, Félix Antoine Tsekedi Tshilombo, he made the social inclusion of persons with disabilities one of his main priorities as soon as he came to power in 2019 by creating a central government ministry responsible for persons with disabilities. And this ambitious vision of the president has strengthened the efforts of the government regarding disability rights. So the minister mentioned that the Democratic Republic of Congo has recently allocated a dedicated funding for persons with disabilities, something that didn't exist previously. It also presented its first report on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2022. And they also initiated at that time a number of reforms to progress on the inclusion of persons with disabilities. So some of them that were mentioned were the adoption of a new law on the rights of persons with disabilities. And they also instated a Medal of Honor of military staff or police officers that have become disabled because of conflict or other incidents. Another outcome mentioned is the setup of a national support fund for the empowerment and accessibility of persons with disabilities. And for the first time also the country set up a general secretariat for persons with disabilities to strengthen the cross-disciplinary approach in the government. And in 2024, I think it was, the Democratic Republic of Congo will finalize the recruitment of 4,300 civil servants and managers, among who up to 60% would be persons with disabilities. The minister also mentioned that despite all the efforts, the challenges of social inclusion of persons with disabilities remains a concern because of various challenges. And some of them are, for example, the persistence of violence that actually injures people and increase the number of persons with disabilities in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Great Lakes regions. There is still a limited budget allocated to the disability sector compared to the needs on the ground, and also limited support from the development cooperation partners in the disability sector. So Ms. Irene Isambo said that it's time that states and international partners, such as World Bank and the UN, also strengthen the financing in the area of disability rights. And to achieve and to improve the results around the inclusion of persons with disabilities, the ministry stressed the need to look at the issue from a transversal and more strategic angle. For example, looking at disability in armed conflicts, disability in climate change, disability and technological developments. And this requires significant investment and allocation of resources to respond to the realities and the increasing needs. So the Democratic Republic of Congo welcomes the establishment of the United Nations Global Fund through the United Nations Partnership, the UNPRPD. And they have supported the efforts of the Democratic Republic of Congo, especially through the ministry of Ms. Irene Isambo. And the ministry also stressed the importance of involving southern countries in all the discussions on disability financing, because it's in these countries that poverty and the harmful effect of poverty are most acute, especially impacting women and children with disabilities. And also organization of persons with disabilities must have a voice in these discussions. Towards the end, the minister also highlighted the need to have efficient mechanisms for exchanging experience regarding ways of improving the social inclusion of persons with disabilities, and strengthen the cooperation and collaboration for the exchange of knowledge, opportunities, and strategies to address the challenges that undermine the inclusion of persons with disabilities around the world. And the minister ended her speech by reiterating the readiness of the Democratic Republic of Congo to cooperate with other states, as well as global and regional groups of persons with disabilities. And this is why the Democratic Republic of Congo intends to accompany and support Africa's participation in the Disability Summit next year on the rights of persons with disability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thank you so much. And now I would like to share with the audience a video message from His Royal Highness Prince Mered. He unfortunately couldn't be in person with us today, but he was very keen to deliver his message virtually on behalf of Jordan and Germany as co-organizers with IDA, the upcoming summit in April next year. So if colleagues could share the video, would be appreciated.
Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear friends, I regret that I cannot be with you in person for this important summit, where ideas are forged and actions for a more sustainable and resilient future are drafted. This summit's timing is especially significant for us in Jordan, as we, alongside Germany and the International Disability Alliance, IDA, prepare to co-host the Global Disability Summit, GDS, next April in Berlin. This will be the first global summit dedicated solely to the rights of persons with disabilities that will be attended by a great number of heads of state from around the world for the very first time. The GDS will address crucial issues such as inclusive education, accessibility, social and economic empowerment, political participation, and disaster risk reduction, among other subjects. This summit presents a transformative opportunity to refocus disability issues and discussions toward the improvement of the lives of persons with disabilities, ensuring they receive an education on par with others, enjoy freedom of movement, gain exciting employment opportunities, and access global travel, and make their voices heard at the ballot box. In this regard, we are focusing on two key areas to drive real change. First is the concept of national ownership. It is essential for all countries, especially developing countries, to continue to elevate disability issues to the forefront of their national agendas. All countries need to prioritize disability issues through national legislation, having a clear understanding of the challenges at hand, formulating strategies, so strategic plans, assigning the necessary human resources, and allocating a percentage of the national budget to execute the plans, etc., etc., etc. In other words, all countries must adopt a serious approach and attitude and be bent upon achieving results. If developing nations in particular can demonstrate this commitment, it will increase the likelihood of receiving support from donor countries and entities. This leads me to my second point. Donor countries and development agencies do not always insist on disability inclusive funding. This, in our view, is a very unfortunate missed opportunity to achieve impact. In the same way, donors always insist on gender being embedded into any proposal or funding, etc., so should disability. It must be there, front and center. All development funding must be made disability sensitive. It must become a standard and a norm. If this occurs, government bureaucrats and decision makers will quickly realize that it is a matter of grave importance that needs immediate attention and not some side issue that can be ignored. The GDS will highlight all these issues because the lives of persons with disabilities matter, and there is an urgent need to take stock of where we are and what needs to be done for persons with disabilities to live a dignified life and to find their place under the sun. Finally, I extend my gratitude to the Summit of the Future organizers, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and the UN UNPRPD for their efforts in making this summit possible. I wish you all success in your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I would like to extend the invitation to His Excellency Arki Young, the UK Ambassador to the UN General Assembly.
Thank you very much. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Ola, for inviting us. It is genuinely an honor to be here today, particularly with such distinguished company. Can I first congratulate you on the Global Disability Fund, and we look forward to working with you and contributing to the work on the strategy. We're here very much to share some thoughts and some experiences, but also really to listen and to learn and to continue in our journey, both as the mission to the UN, but also as the UK government, to understand the lived experiences of persons with disabilities and how we can work across all partners, whether that is here in New York at the UN or across the globe, to try to improve that experience, to empower, to enable, and to work with you on that journey. The minister from Finland very kindly, he mentioned the Pact of the Future. And I should say that over the last few days, I really haven't got much sleep, to be honest, because the negotiations on that pact are very much in the end game phase. I look in the room and I see a couple of other people who've been in the room, and I hope that I'm not looking as tired as you look right now. But it is tantalizing. We are very close to having a pact tomorrow morning that can be adopted by all countries. There is a pact and a global digital compact and a declaration for future generations that is on the table, has been presented by the President of the General Assembly. And it's important, we feel, that all countries are now in a position to sign up to that. I thought I would share with you some of the points that are in there, which are particularly pertinent to this audience and the subjects that we're covering today. So a few of the phrases that we, and in this I turn particularly to my colleague Gaia, who was in the negotiations on some of these issues particularly, that collectively we think provide a way forward. So it refers to the disproportionate impact of violence on persons with disability, new technologies to empower and advance equity for persons with disability, enhancing inclusion of young people with disability, meaningful participation, accessibility at the UN. The Global Digital Compact included the rights of persons with disability, the importance of accessible user interfaces, the importance of data on persons with disability. And the Declaration on Future Generations stresses the full and equal participation of persons with disabilities of present and future generations. Now, I know that the fact that those are in these documents doesn't somehow magic them into reality, but I list them for you as hooks for your work, as direction, that mean that the Global Disability Summit next year, the fund, the strategy, to use these hooks to really drive the agenda forward. And now we are very much looking forward to the summit next year. We were proud, alongside the government of Kenya and the International Disability Alliance, to host the Global Disability Summit in 2018. We see that as really having set a new benchmark for disability inclusive development. We were very pleased to see it generate over 1,000 commitments from around the world, and it gave that increase in momentum on disability rights. And we were very pleased to see that that legacy continued through the work of Ghana and Norway in 2022. And we absolutely look forward with full confidence to the summit in Berlin next year, hosted by Germany and by Jordan. These summits, of course, they are not an end in themselves. They are once again an opportunity to raise these issues, to get those hooks, and to really advance the tangible, practical action on the ground. And we know that that is absolutely critical, given the setbacks of the pandemic and the increase in ongoing risks to people with disabilities of so many humanitarian crises that are happening across the world right now. It's therefore imperative that we use the summit to ensure that disability is put front and center on the political agenda and receives the political attention that it deserves. Of course, that's part of the purpose of this week as well, with the Summit of the Future, And I look forward to attending many more events with people in this room where we can continue to discuss these issues. Of course, in the UK, we have a new government, and that new government has made clear that it will put equality at the heart of what we do. And we will continue to put the rights, voice, choice, and visibility of all, including people with disabilities, at the center of our policy and development. Now, as part of this, we are committed to defending universal human rights and democratic freedoms to accelerate implementation of the UNPRPD and continue to work to uphold the obligations that are set out within it. We're also trying to make sure that we do it ourselves in terms of the work of the FCDO, our operations, to make sure they are as inclusive as possible and that we meaningfully engage disabled people's organizations as we develop the policy and as we deliver. Now, collectively, it's important that all of that work is underpinned by the sense that nothing about us is without us. And that's an easy phrase to say, but actually really making that a reality across all of our work is something that we continue to work on, and we continue to learn from people in this room and online to make sure that we are fully upholding that principle. And that spirit, we recognize that people with disabilities are the only people who know about the barriers they face and how best to overcome them. And therefore we submit to you and we learn from you and we listen. Now, looking ahead, I've talked about the summit. I've talked about that critical long-term lasting impact. I also mentioned the importance of the translation of these commitments, of these statements into actions. And we just really look forward to working with you. We recognize that with 1 in 6 people across the world having a disability and 1/5 of the world's poorest people, we really need to take that disability inclusive approach if we are to be able to serve both our own population and the most vulnerable people across the world. And we look forward to doing so with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now I would like to welcome His Excellency Mr. Andreas Von, Deputy Permanent Representative of Sweden.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I fully agree with my colleague from the UK, Archie, that we are here in the business of listening to you. Fortunately, you gave a description of the negotiations and what is relevant for disabled in the Summit of the Future negotiations and the pact that we're discussing. So I can delete that part of my speech. So I'll stick to my normal remarks here. It will be a slight Swedish accent, though, I'm afraid about that, but I hope that's okay. Leave no one behind is the central promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It entails reaching the poorest of the poor, but also combating discrimination and exclusion of persons with disabilities. Persons with disabilities, especially women and girls, are often those furthest left behind, those most discriminated against, and those most excluded everywhere in the world. By the WHO definition, there are almost 1.3 billion persons living with long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments that, in interaction with various barriers, may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. Sweden's commitment to disability inclusive development is at the core of our development cooperation assistance, aimed at improving the living conditions for people subjected to violence, discrimination, persecution, and oppression, including persons with disabilities. The essence of our policies is to promote the enjoyment of human rights and freedoms. This is why we stand by the UN Global Disability Fund, created to advance the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This unique fund is aimed at galvanizing the collective efforts of 11 UN system entities to deliver as one UN. Since 2012, these efforts have benefited over 350 million people across 93 countries, including in humanitarian contexts, such as in Ukraine. Funding for disability inclusion is crucial, and combined with integrating disability inclusion into all development cooperation efforts, including in sectors as health, education, employment, and digitalization. Only this way will we be able to ensure synergies and leverage efforts. Most importantly, persons with disabilities and their organizations have to engage in shaping the politics across sectors as enshrined in the CRPD. As the saying goes, nothing about us without us. So I'm pleased to note that the presence here of organizations of persons with disabilities, such as the International Disability Alliance, is here today. The IDA is another global disability partner of Sweden and represents over 1,000 organizations of persons with disabilities. Today's event marks the forthcoming Global Disability Summit taking place at the occasion of the Summit of the Future and its bold agenda. Looking ahead, we need to ensure that the commitments of the Pact for the Future is disability inclusive, including in the development of new technologies. And as you might be aware, Sweden is co-facilitating the Global Digital Compact that we hope will be adopted tomorrow. And it's very important for us that this Global Digital Compact remains anchored in human rights and reaches those furthest behind. Persons with disabilities constitute 15% of the world's population. That's about 1 in 6 people who have far too long been left behind. So we are fast reaching the year 2030 by when the promises of inclusion and empowerment must be delivered. So finally, to sum up, with intent, partnerships, and coordinated efforts, we can accelerate towards our vision of a truly inclusive society where everyone, regardless of disability status, can achieve their full potential as humans. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now I would like to welcome Mr. Sergio Corina Martin, Director General of Sustainable Development Policy in Spain.
Thank you, Ola, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. It is an honor to join you today at this important event representing Spain, also a country deeply committed to advancing the rights and inclusion of persons with disabilities, both domestically and internationally. As we gather here within the framework of the Summit of the Future, as our colleague said, hoping for an ambitious pact to be adopted tomorrow, we face a crucial moment. Our world is facing global challenges, and it is imperative more than ever that we make sure that no one is left behind for real. Persons with disabilities are still among the groups too often put in the most vulnerable situations in our societies. This is unacceptable, and therefore your rights must be placed at the forefront of our efforts for global progress, justice, and implementation of the SDGs. Spain has long been dedicated to promoting the rights of persons with disabilities since ratifying the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2008. And a significant step in this direction has been the recent reform of Article 41.1 of our Constitution in February 2024, marking the third constitutional amendment since its adoption in 1978. This reform enshrines the recognition of the rights of persons with disabilities under the highest standards of real and effective equality. Our commitment is further strengthened by the new Spanish disability strategy for the next decade, which integrates the rights of persons with disabilities into every level of our internal domestic policies, but also our external action and internal cooperation. And this has been once again reinforced through the approval of our new master plan for Spanish development cooperation, which really strengthens the human rights-based approach and mentions specifically the need to tackle the barriers and gaps for the effective implementation of the rights. The Spanish cooperation has a long tradition of working in these areas through different tools, bilaterally with public institutions of our partner countries in Latin America, in the Middle East, also regionally, globally, with supporting global projects such as UNFPA's We Decide, trying also to foster an intersectional approach that takes into account the multiple discrimination patterns that some groups and persons have still to face. But today we have an opportunity to start giving a step or a big step, we hope, ahead, and to discuss and identify collectively specific actions that can guarantee increased and sustained financial commitments for the inclusion of persons with disabilities within the UN system and the broader development and humanitarian system. As we look forward to the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development that will be held in Spain next year, we believe we must seize this chance to integrate disability inclusion into all aspects of our financial strategies. To do so, of course, we must leverage inclusive financing mechanisms, promote transparency, and build partnerships that address the needs of the most marginalized groups. We have been being part of the Global Action on Disability Network for some years, but we believe that we still have to continue working on this alliance-based approach, but with this also this focus on real financing commitments. We also believe that it's important to put at the core of these discussions how to integrate the rights of persons with disabilities approach into climate financing, which will be a very important discussion through the COPs, but also in Sevilla next year. And in planning and implementing climate initiatives, we must ensure that at the identification, implementation, and monitoring level, the voices and priorities of persons with disabilities are heard and incorporated to the decision-making processes. Of course, this agenda, the Financing for Development agenda, gives us this broader scope. We believe that the private sector, philanthropic organizations, foundations, IFIs also have to play a vital role in accelerating financing for disability inclusion, integrating inclusive practices into business models and investment strategies, and by supporting innovative and impactful initiatives by which these stakeholders can also contribute to drive empowerment for persons with disabilities. So as we approach the Global Disability Summit in 2025 and the FFD4 conference in Spain this same year, we believe that we must lead now by example. So we warmly invite you all to join us in Spain. The commitment of Spain when presenting the candidacy for hosting this very important event was first and foremost to make it an inclusive participatory process. So of course we keep our commitment with this principle, and we believe that together we can shape the future of inclusive development and the FFD agenda for the next, hopefully for the next decade, ensuring that our financial commitments respond to also our political and sustainable development humanitarian commitments. So let us seize the occasion, the moment that next year will bring. And thank you all for the joint commitment and dedication to this very important agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergio. Now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Erica, who's the Director of Human Development, Migration and Governance and Peace from the European Union.
Thank you very much, Ola, and really great to stand here in front of you this afternoon. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this invitation. I am really delighted to be among you all this afternoon to reconfirm our commitment as a European Union for the realization of the rights of persons with disabilities within the EU and beyond. And I must say that also the high number of EU member states representatives on this panel also speaks for the strong commitment of the EU as a group on this agenda. Human rights, non-discrimination and equality of all persons, including persons with disabilities, are fundamental values enshrined in the EU Charter for Fundamental Rights and in the European Convention on the Protection of Human Rights. The EU signed the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2021. And in the same year, in March 2021, the EU has rolled out its own new disability strategy for within the EU, which is called the Union of Equality Strategy for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities for the period 2021 to 2030. Beyond the European Union itself, our partnership with the UNPRPD is at the center of our efforts to implement the external dimension of this strategy. We value the UNPRPD's multi-stakeholder approach, working through UN agencies, partner country bodies, and civil society organizations to advance the CRPD implementation. And we also are proud to be a donor to the UN Multi-Donor Trust Fund of the UNPRPD with a contribution of 5 million euros for the period 2023 to 2027. Some speakers, the Prince, the Minister, you've been mentioning how it is important to mainstream disability throughout our policies, as we do, all of us, for the gender policy. And I must say that in my Directorate General for International Partnerships of the European Commission, this is exactly what we are doing, using the OECD disability marker, what we call the D marker. Since 2029, we have been tracking all our new programs using this D marker. In 2023, we found that 41% of the new actions in the area of international partnerships which we finance were disability inclusive in various ways and extents. This marks also an almost threefold increase since 2020, when just only 14% of our external action was disability inclusive. Of course, however, we still have a long way to go. Going forward, as EU, we are rolling out the Global Gateway strategy, which is a strategy aiming at investing and boosting smart, clean and secure links in the digital, energy, transport sectors, as well as strengthening health systems, education and research system across the world. The Global Gateway, through its 360 degrees approach, where we are also looking at the enabling environment and the necessary investments to make these new infrastructure successful, we are, through this strategy, aiming at creating jobs in emerging fields that require investing in technical and vocational educational training programs. These are opportunities for meaningful inclusion of persons with disabilities. The Global Gateway investments will also directly benefit persons with disabilities. For example, improved greener transport systems and smarter cities can be more accessible and safer for all the users, including persons with disabilities. Digitalization and better connectivity create opportunities for better services for all. Artificial intelligence can help the lives of persons with disabilities when well planned and, of course, well regulated. In that respect, we are also very much looking forward to the outcomes of the Global Disability Summit of 2025. And while we focus on delivering on our existing commitments from the previous Global Disability Summit, we are also interested in the new initiatives that the co-hosts are preparing, such as the Initiative on Resilient and Inclusive Cities. The focus fits well with this global strategy that we are rolling out, as I just mentioned, because it helps building greener, smarter cities, which are also more accessible. Finally, I would like to highlight an emerging topic, which I think should gain more attention, which is around the care economy. According to the recent UN flagship report on disability and development of 2024, only 43% of persons with disabilities find community activities challenging. 22% require more personal assistance than they actually receive, and 44% lack any personal assistance. We believe that more investment is needed in the care economy from both the public and the private sector. These investments should include training personal assistants and carers to support independent living and assisting technologies that are essential to all persons with disabilities, but also for facilitating independence. Accessible housing is also a key dimension of this. We look forward to continuing partnering and working with all of you here today in the room, as well as online, and organizations of persons with disabilities across our partner countries in all these priorities to advance on the realizations of rights of persons with disabilities. Many thanks for your attention.
Good afternoon, colleagues and excellencies, and thank you very much, Ola, for the opportunity to speak. I have the pleasure of delivering these remarks on behalf of the Australian Government. My Deputy Secretary, Rod Brazier, sends his apologies. Thank you. Advancing equity for people with disability and advocating for their human rights is a priority for Australia, both at home and overseas. As we've heard from other colleagues here today, we know that some 16% of the global population, approximately 1.3 billion people, live with disability. And these numbers are growing, as most people will experience temporary or permanent impairment in their lifetime. It's estimated that the exclusion of people with disability costs as much as 7% of potential GDP. Everyone benefits from equity and inclusion. Societies are more inclusive and cohesive and resilient. Excuse me, I'm actually finding the microphone quite difficult. I have a visual impairment myself, so I'm just going to hold it a bit closer to my eyes. I hope you can hear me. Stable economies experience more sustainable growth and development, and rates of poverty and disadvantage are reduced. Disability inclusion is a cross-cutting priority for Australia's international engagement in development, humanitarian action, and human rights. Australia's International Development Policy, released in August 2023, commits Australia to advancing the rights of persons with disabilities and prioritising disability equity as a core issue for action in our international development program. Australia was the first donor to develop a standalone strategy for disability inclusive development in 2015. Australia is now developing a new international disability equity and rights strategy. This new strategy is being informed through our consultations in the Asia Pacific and globally, deeply listening to the views and priorities of people with disability. We are working with an external reference group comprising 12 eminent disability rights experts from across the globe who have also provided critical advice and guidance. We've heard important priorities to strengthen the disability rights movement, to address discrimination and exclusion, to increase access to assistive technology, to support equity in humanitarian assistance and climate action, and invest in data and evidence. Australia has been a leading supporter of the UNPRPD as well, since it was established in 2011. Support to UNPRPD has played a key role in supporting partner governments to implement the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, including in Timor-Leste and Solomon Islands in 2023. In recent years, we've deepened our partnership with UNPRPD to respond to conflict, to support comprehensive disability inclusive programs in Ukraine, a critical need and sadly a critical gap in donor assistance. I would like to thank the hosts for bringing together such a diverse and important group of stakeholders and providing the opportunity to highlight the importance of disability equity and human rights, disability inclusion and financing. Our shared commitment on disability equity and rights are responding to real and immediate calls for action, and respects and elevates the voices, priorities and leadership of people with disabilities and local communities in national policy and in global forums. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Niambi from Kenya to deliver her remarks. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Ola, for moderating this opening segment, and again for this invitation. The full, equal, and meaningful participation of persons with disabilities is essential to achieving sustainable development. And we are determined to ensure that inclusivity becomes not just a goal, but a reality for all. Kenya's efforts in disability inclusion are anchored in our Constitution, which safeguards the rights and dignity of all citizens, ensuring that persons with disabilities are afforded the same economic, social, and political opportunities as their peers. Kenya has put in place a range of policies and measures to address systemic inequalities, promote equal opportunities, and economically empower persons with disabilities to create a more inclusive and fair society and protect their human rights and fundamental freedoms. Economic empowerment is key to achieving inclusion. At the national level, Kenya has established robust frameworks to promote economic empowerment, improve service delivery, and enhance social protections for persons with disabilities. Some of the initiatives being implemented in Kenya include the Uwezo Fund and the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, which open access to financial resources for persons with disabilities, providing them with the tools to pursue entrepreneurship and self-reliance. The right of work is a fundamental right, essential for the realization of other human rights and forms of an inseparable and inherent part of human dignity. The right to work also contributes to the survival of individuals and to that of their family, and to their development and recognition within the community. Kenya is addressing the critical issue of employment by providing conditions for everyone to engage in decent work for economic growth. Through its various training arms, the government of Kenya is actively working towards the empowerment of persons with disabilities by training them for decent work, promoting sustainable livelihood and economic growth. Kenya has invested in innovative solutions such as the AI-powered career portal, which matches job seekers with disabilities to employment opportunities. In 2024 alone, over 300 persons with disabilities secured employment through this platform, and we are determined to continue scaling these efforts. These programs are central to our strategy of creating an inclusive economy where every citizen can contribute and prosper. Furthermore, the Persons with Disabilities Act 2003 provides for affirmative action in job placement and in securing employment. This includes providing incentives to those who employ and adapt workplaces to accommodate the needs of employees with disabilities. The Act further established the National Council for Persons with Disabilities and the National Development Fund for Persons with Disabilities to support key programs providing scholarships, assistive technologies, and infrastructure that empower individuals to lead independent and fulfilling lives. In conclusion, Kenya's commitment to disability inclusion is enduring. However, we recognize that this is a global challenge that requires collective action. As we look to the future, we call upon the international community to strengthen collaboration and partnerships. Together, we must pool our resources, share best practices, and advance policies that ensure the rights and dignity of persons with disabilities are upheld across the world. We are confident that through sustained international cooperation, we can unlock the potential of every individual and ensure that no one is left behind. We look forward to working with all of you. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to welcome Dr. Natalia Kalam as the current chair of the UNPRPD from UNFPA.
Excellency, Dr. Ola, distinguished participants here in New York and all over the world, I greet you in peace. Peace indeed is the precondition for prosperity, for sustainable development, and of course, for the rights and choices of persons with disabilities. Nothing about us without us. And yes, UNFPA proudly chairs the United Nations Partnership on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, knowing that the tapestry of humanity is woven with threads of diverse abilities, where everyone's contribution to society is significant and matters. For UNFPA, disability is synonymous with opportunity. Opportunity to prove that with the right type of assistance, there are no limits to human potential. And that boundless human potential is represented by the renaming of the now Global Disability Fund and our recommitment to its ambitious drive for global impact that penetrates in every village, in every city, in every community. On the eve of the Summit of the Future, that name change to me really reflects a unique approach that this fund is developing. It's uniting the United Nations and governments, yes, but also civil society under the leadership of persons with disabilities. Very important as we look towards that future that's going to embody the diversity of our societies. One where everyone indeed can reach their full potential, where indeed no one is left behind. And yes, that should include the approximately 1 in 6 in this world of 8 billion of us, where younger people and older people are coping and hopefully thriving, living with disabilities. So as this Global Disability Fund mobilizes the financial resources as it enhances institutional capacities and as it lends its voice and its leadership to the types of initiatives that address the unique needs of persons with disabilities, UNFPA is lending our full support in the over 150 countries where we operate to initiatives such as this. And our own flagship disability inclusion program, as you've heard, We Decide, operates under that banner of nothing about us without us. UNFPA is helping to expand access, in particular, to sexual and reproductive health services, to data analysis, and to timely information which is tailored to the needs of women, girls, and young people with disabilities, working side by side with the people we serve to deliver that kind of inclusive service. And again, sexual and reproductive health services, because we have to never forget the entitlement to sexual and reproductive health and the enjoyment of reproductive rights that are part of the entitlements of persons living with disabilities. A couple of examples in Morocco, for example, we have developed a customized service app. This was developed with young people with autism, in this case, to help them access information in a way that's understandable so that their biology and their anatomy becomes familiar. In a place like Vanuatu, UNFPA is supporting humanitarian pre-positioning, pre-planning for menstrual health interventions to be thought through before the disaster hits. Before that humanitarian emergency, mobility issues, hearing issues, visual impairment. All of this has to be planned for so that we can have timely and appropriate evacuation if it's flood, if it's drought, whatever the condition would be. And lastly, in El Salvador, I'm really happy to report to you that young women with disabilities are learning and receiving training from UNFPA so that they understand not only their bodily anatomy, but also their bodily autonomy, their rights, and to know what to do if anyone tries to cause them harm. Gabriela, one of the participants in that training in El Salvador, has an intellectual disability. And she told us, now I feel like I can take my own decisions. And now I feel like I can achieve goals that I will set for myself. It's sad that for too many women and young people, disability status is a negative that hinders their access to protective services, to essential health services. So briefly, to close, what do I think needs to change? Know that in some developing countries, nearly 30% of births to women with disabilities are not attended by a midwife or other skilled health worker. And that women and girls with disabilities still are twice as likely to be subjected to sexual violence. Some 22% of married women with disabilities have an unmet need for family planning. These are things that we can be pragmatic about, that we can do something about, and we have to aspire. Today, what I'm asking is your unwavering political support and financial support for full disability inclusion, for increased funding, and for that political will of steel that's going to help us advance disability rights around the world and to prioritize women and girls with disabilities. As we've heard already, we can do better in policy and in programming to engage young people with disabilities in planning, to build that future where everyone is included and valued. The momentum is building. Our meeting today is a sign of that, and it's partnership that has made this happen. And UNFPA thanks the lead partners. We believe that we should not be limited, right, by other people's limited imaginations, by other people's beliefs that there are limits to the dignity and respect for all people. Our guiding star should be, with hope and with determination, to prove that there are no limits to what we can achieve when we work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Natalia. And now I would like to welcome Mr. Holian Su, who is the Associate Administrator of UNDP, and UNDP has been hosting the fund since establishment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ola. I will just talk very briefly about UNDP, what we're doing, and also about our secretariat role. For UNDP, we're certainly very committed to this agenda. We're trying to do a couple of things. One is that we focus on issues that have transformative impact on the rights of people with disabilities. Right? We work on policies, right? We work on support institutions. We support the organization of people with disability. And we work on related practices, right, that are specific to the rights of people with disabilities. Secondly, we're also driving the mainstreaming of the rights of people with disability in our other programs, right? And we'll talk about the joint programs and the funds a bit later. But for UNDP, for example, we have trackers of different kinds, right? For 2023, we know that $370 million of our program has the rights of people with disability, right, as a specific beneficiary, right? Rights of people with disability. So $370 million budgeted program that addresses this issue. So this is what we're trying to do. Now, the third thing we're doing is our host role for the partnership. We're very proud, to have the opportunity to do this. And as Andreas mentioned earlier, The partnership was established in 2012. Since then, these 11 UN agencies have supported 350 million people with disabilities, right? And these 11 agencies includes the funds and the programs, as well as specialized agencies, right? Office of Human Rights, High Commission for Human Rights, right? And also UNDESA, right? Which supports the member states for the implementation of the convention, right? Now, the funds that have received over the last few years, I think in total is about 70-some million dollars, okay? And I must create some controversy here, probably. Apology to the minister. I think Sweden outrank you a little bit in terms of total contribution. You're very close, okay? So let's compete after the meeting, okay? But this total contribution of $70-80 million over the last 12-13 years is not huge, let's say, significant, not huge. But it is very weighty, I would say, very weighty. It is catalytic, right? It brought 11 agencies together. And there's some other statistics behind the 350 million number of people, right? This $80 million seeded 94 joint programs of agencies, right? And supported 100,000 of organizations of people with disabilities and the government agencies, right? And it supported the enaction of improvement of 87 laws, policies, strategies, right? And other, regulatory actions, right? And then it also resulted in the changes in 213 systems level changes, right? Which includes practices and the service provisions and so forth, right? So this is what the partnerships can achieve, right? With your support, right? And I must, to end, okay, I must just name, right, all the donors which have provided the support from the beginning and in the process that have provided support, right? That's Finland, right? Sweden, Australia, United Kingdom, right? Norway, European Union, Canada, Germany, Ireland, Mexico, and Spain, right? So as Natalie mentioned earlier, we look forward to the continued partnership in the interest of people, in the rights of people with disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harleen, and thank you so much for all the speakers and for your presence with us today. And I am fully dedicated to continue the collaboration with you all and everyone in the room. Looking forward for our next gathering, hopefully for further discussions on this. And I'm delighted to now introduce the next panel. So if I would appreciate all the panelists to go back to the floor. And now I would like to introduce Ms. Tala Ramahi, the Chief Strategy Officer at the Reaching the Last Mile, which supports the global health philanthropy of the President of the United Arab Emirates. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, also Reaching the Last Mile, works to advance the health equity and to meet the needs of those often left behind. Tala, if you don't mind, welcoming your panel. Thank you so much.
If I can please invite my fellow panelists to the stage. Thank you very much. Dr. Alexander Gorsdorf, Natalie, Stephanie Speck, Martin, last but not least, Dr. Philippe. Thank you very much for joining us. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tala Al-Ramahi, as Ola had kindly introduced me, and I'm very delighted to be moderating today's conversation on financing inclusive development. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be discussing the urgent need to drive greater investment in disability inclusive development and the concrete actions we can take to deliver on this. Disability inclusion, as you've heard today, is still starkly underfunded. Worldwide, 1 in 7 people has a disability, yet grants targeting this population group make just about 2% of all human rights funding. And even this is in decline. Persons with disabilities are still routinely overlooked in development programs, in financing for emergencies and crises, and in climate action. This is despite the significantly higher risk they face in both conflict situations and natural disasters. However, we know that inclusion pays off for everyone, economically, socially, ethically, and the benefits of investing in people with disabilities are clear. When people with disabilities are included in education and employment, they contribute to the economy. In fact, a World Bank study found that exclusion of people with disabilities from the workforce can cost economies up to 7% of GDP. The challenge is how to best translate this knowledge into more and sustained funding within the UN system, from donor governments, philanthropies, and more. Here to help us map this path forward, we have our 5 expert panelists that I'm happy to introduce. Dr. Alexander Gorsdorf, Deputy Commissioner of the Global Disability Summit of being held in Germany in partnership with Jordan next year. Natalie Akon-Gabala, Director of Gender and Economic Inclusion at the International Finance Corporation, and Stephanie Speck, Head of Communications at the Green Climate Fund. Martin Abrigo, Vice President of the International Programs at the Ford Foundation, and last but certainly not least, Dr. Philippe Pollier, Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs with the United Nations Youth Office. Thank you all for being here. Our panelists bring a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I encourage you all to actively engage as we discuss how we can turn the tide on funding for disability inclusion. So let's get started. My first question is to Dr. Alexander. Dr. Alexander, each Global Disability Summit, including the upcoming one being held in Berlin next year, aims to accelerate change through mobilizing national governments, donors, and development agencies to make concrete commitments. Germany as a co-host, one thing we'd love to know is what is Germany hoping that the summit will achieve in terms of increasing financing for disability inclusive development?
Is it working? Yes. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. I feel honored to speak in the presence of so many interesting speakers, actually. So this is a panel on financing for disability inclusion. And I have to say first off that the Global Disability Summit isn't primarily about financing. You heard something about this in the statement of Prince Miret. It was an agreement among the co-hosts that the Global Disability Summit shouldn't be something like a pledging conference. And yes, financing is absolutely essential, but still the most important thing in our view as co-hosts to effect change is political commitment, ownership of the issue. Because even if we find new sources of financing, there still is little time and little place and little room in global leaders' thoughts, agendas, and it's a hard thing to influence that. So this is the main mission that we set for ourselves, getting to a place where the Global Disability Summit is not only a transient event, a 2-day event, but a series of events and a global mechanism that continually raises commitment for disability inclusion. Having said that, let me just skip levels a bit, become much more concrete, and present to you some of the dimensions in which we do address financing for disability inclusion. So the first one would be that what we are planning among the co-hosts of Germany and Jordan is a debt swap for disability inclusion. And that's an interesting thing, I think, because it addresses the major issue of the debt crisis in the global south. And it also is a way to provide financing beyond fresh money, as you might say. So potentially, this could be an interesting model. It's a modest thing we're talking about in a medium-sized double-digit million amount of euros, of which about 10% or maybe 15 would be allocated for disability inclusion, but still, this could be something that could be talked a lot more about. And the second thing I'd like to mention is that we plan on having a deliverable that's called the Global Disability Inclusion Report. And this report will feature a chapter on financing for disability inclusion. UNICEF is in the lead for this and coordinating the efforts with different agencies. This will be about domestic and international financing and CRPD compliant budgeting. So when this comes out in April 2025, maybe this is something that you can look into for the Financing for Development Conference. And the third thing that I'd like to mention is a project or an initiative called 15% for the 15%. We're going to have a summit declaration. The GDS declaration is supposed to commit countries to dedicate 15% of development cooperation activities to disability inclusion. So they need to increase both the volume and the number of measures targeting disability inclusion in development cooperation. This is especially addressed to countries of the global south, putting them in the driver's seat as to which are the priorities in their development portfolio. So this will be a topic for the intergovernmental negotiations about where the funding should go. And lastly, but not leastly, let me briefly mention an initiative that we're planning on inclusive and disability accessible and disability inclusive cities. As 50% of persons with disabilities worldwide live in cities, and cities are particularly affected by crises, catastrophes, and conflicts. And persons with disabilities mortality in conflicts is up to twice as high as other people's. So with an initial funding from Germany, what we're trying to do here is an attempt at mobilizing fresh funding for a cross-cutting and important issue, and to do this in a smart way, not as another initiative besides all the other initiatives that are out there, but trying to leverage the investments that are already out there for disability inclusion, including donors beyond OECD, international financing institutions, private and philanthropic money. So this may sound a bit more easy than it is, because bringing all these different types of actors and funding agents under one roof is a difficult thing, but that's the ambition. So in closing, I invite you all to join the Global Disability Summit 2025, maybe a side event on financing for disability inclusion, turning commitments to advance disability inclusion in your organization or with the programs that you are having, and or join the above mentioned 4 initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alexander. We heard you speak about how Germany would love to leverage the Global Disability Summit to mobilize political action and political commitments. But in order to have these political commitments, we also need to make sure they're being translated into financial commitments. Natalie, I have a question about this, in fact. Building on the 10 commitments that were made during the Global Disability Summit previously, what action has IFC taken to date, and what lessons can be learned for increasing financing for inclusive development and climate action in future IFC operations?
Can you hear me? Yeah. First of all, thank you. Thank you for having invited us today. It's a great opportunity really to be with colleagues who are from governments and different officials, but also in the private sector and in the development community that are committed to advance diversity or disability inclusion, but also to learn and listen from everybody in the room. So let me share with you a few updates of what IFC and our work since those commitments. Really for us, the message is that disability inclusion is a business imperative. It's not only about human rights, it is a business imperative as well. And when we work with our clients, this is really the message that we put forward. IFC made a strategic decision in 2020 to expand and include disability inclusion in the department that I led, the Department of Economic Inclusion. And that has changed tremendously the way that we work, because it means that we have started to take a lens at mainstreaming this conversation when we interact with our clients. And we do this by looking at the different functions of the private sector and making sure that in all those conversations, the client had the opportunity to take a 360-degree look at how he buys, how he sells, how he employs, and making sure that disability inclusion is mainstream and taken into consideration. IFC also have the performance standards, and the performance standards is really the tool, as we discuss with our clients, to make sure that disability and inclusion is part of the framework. But also the new World Bank Group Gender Strategy that was launched in June has included disability inclusion also at the center of the strategy. And this is reflected in IFC roadmap for implementation. So this is really the framework that we work with. Now, what does that mean? It means that in our work, we look at three main types of activities. The first one is around thought leadership and research. We are conducting, and I will come back to that in more detail, a number of research to build the business case and demonstrate the importance of the agenda with our clients. We are also running what we call peer learning platform in the private sector, in the region and the different country, where we convene the main companies around the topic to exchange knowledge, to exchange experience, and promote best cases. The last point is the point of investment and advisory, where we design investment solution and advisory solution for our clients. But really the importance is to conduct the three at the same time for really building a convincing case and making sure that our client understand the need. So the first point around research and thought leadership in June, during the UN Convention of State Parties for the Convention on the Right of Person with Disability, we launched a guide, an investment guide, which was one of the first of its kind, which is really a three-step framework that influence investor to commit their capital and to foster inclusion and support persons with disability across their value chain. So this guide also highlights some innovative financing instruments like sustainable finance and blended finance investments. So following the success of this guide, we also collaborating with the GDI Urban Climate Investment Fund. We publish a guide called Disability Inclusion in Climate Finance. And to build on our climate and disability work, we conducted a disability economy scoping study in 4 Pacific countries with support of DFAT that were in the room a bit earlier. And this study allowed us to assess the state of disability inclusion in the private sector highlighting not only the gaps, but also the opportunity for investment. So this resource has provided a valuable insight for investment officer, but also for development finance community in terms of the work and highlighting a compelling case for investment and really to inspire for action. So this is really part of the work that we've committed around research. The second element, as I mentioned, is around those peer learning platforms. And following the success of a peer learning platform that we had in Sri Lanka called Together We Can Plus, we saw that our clients, the private sector, was going further, was doing more that taking employment practices that enable the participation of people living with disability to support persons with disability as consumers. And that was quite interesting. One of our clients, IFC clients, for example, Mass Holding, established the Adaptive Center of Excellence to conceptualize and design and test and manufacture inclusive clothing for persons living with disability. And it's resulting in launching an adaptive clothing brand that is accessible to anyone with a permanent or a temporary disability. So the example of Mass is important because it's a large company in Sri Lanka, for example, that employ over 500 people living with disability. And this was replicated in Mexico when we launched another peer learning platform with 12 companies to discuss also best practice and exchange knowledge. The third point is around investment. So as I mentioned, research, peer learning, but also investment. And we ensure that the disability and inclusive lens is embedded in our investment solution and product with our clients, but also in our advisory work. So we have developed an ESG appraisal tools that all investment officers have to use when they engage with the different clients to assess the state of disability inclusion in their operation and making sure that we support those clients in closing the gap throughout the lens of our investment with them. So last point that I would like to make is that we are also looking at the disability inclusion in the education maturity of our level of our clients, especially in the education space, because it's important. And also another sector where we have a particular attention is the transport sector. So I would say that thank you to the different partners that we've been able to work with. A lot of work has been done. There's still much more to be done, and it will require continued, as was mentioned before me, engagement of the public sector and the private sector working together, but also, more importantly, always make sure that we listen to the need of the person living with disability and understand them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Natalie. I'm just keeping a close eye on the time because Ola told me that I have to keep everyone in check, but these are very insightful responses, Natalie, to how you're looking at your investments. Stephanie, I have a question for you, and I think this is really quite pertinent to the UAE as well, as we played host to COP28 and the Green Climate Fund coming up as one of the larger financing vehicles for climate finance. As you look at the Green Climate Fund strategic plan for 2027 and identifying protecting the most vulnerable people and communities as a key programming priority, from the Green Climate Fund's perspective of delivering projects across the world, what opportunities exist for systematically embedding disability inclusion into climate projects? And how can the rights of people with disabilities be better prioritized when we think about climate finance?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here to listen and learn this afternoon. I was in Tonga a couple of weeks ago for the Pacific Island Leaders Forum, and as we landed, Tonga was hit by 4 earthquakes of quite significant magnitude, coming closer and closer to the surface. My colleague and I, knowing very well the natural hazard history of Tonga, after we disembarked the plane, looked around and thought, is there a tsunami coming? What's next? And what do we do? Now, Tonga is flat. So in fact, there was only one option, and that would be to run faster than a tsunami, or to climb the highest building, which happened to be only 3 stories tall. We had the luxury of being able to make that choice, of being able to hear if there was a tsunami warning, of being able to see our way through the streets, of being able to run. And I'm not sure that we ever want to use the word luxury in relation to climate action. In fact, we should be using words like equity and accessibility and human rights. We know that people living with disability are 2 to 4 times more likely to die or be injured in climate emergencies, and that's unacceptable. A year ago here at UNGA, GCF's Executive Director, Mafalda Duarte, made a promise. She promised a few things about the Green Climate Fund. She promised that we would build ambitiously to manage $50 billion of climate investment by the year 2030, and that a key focus of that investment finance would be dealing with communities and people exposed to climate vulnerability. And not only do I lead communications for GCF, but I'm also the head of our vulnerability portfolio. And with more than 90% of all recorded disasters climate related, from our perspective, not engaging the 1 billion people around the world living with some form of disability is a wasted opportunity. It would be a failure not to draw upon the expertise and experience of this community, which has developed resilience and coping strategies to manage and overcome marginalisation. The Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction states clearly that an inclusive, accessible, all of society approach to protecting lives and livelihoods is an investment, not a cost. And we live by that credo. So what is the Green Climate Fund doing about this? We're the largest multilateral climate finance institution. We have $15 billion committed at the moment to climate investment in 130 countries across 270 projects. And we are really committed to making sure that when we access and assess projects and concept notes, that we are looking for key promotion of social inclusion. We're looking for inclusive project design, investing in improving accessibility of infrastructure and services, training and capacity building of persons living with disabilities, and engagement with organisations representing persons with disabilities. But actually, when I put this speech together and asked for the hard data on how much of our investment is going towards inclusion and towards persons living with disabilities, our team couldn't tell me. So we, the world's largest climate finance investor, can't actually aggregate our data to understand how much of those $15 billion is actually going to the communities and people represented by participants here today. I find that shocking. And I had coffee with Mafalda just before I came here and said, did she know that? And she also did not know that. So can I say that that is a pledge from us? We restructured last week and we have a new data and monitoring department, and you can be very sure that aggregated, accurate data will be part of our promise going forward. But we also need to do far more specifically and deliberately with organisations representing people with disabilities. If you're here today as an organisation, one of those organisations, if you're here representing a country, I think you should come to us and talk to us about our readiness funding. That's a $500 million capacity building initiative. It's again, the world's largest capacity building initiative around climate action. Every country has the right to access $4 million. And in fact, if you're in a small island developing state, you have the right to access $7 million to program your investment pipeline around climate action. And you should be seeking to use some of that money to partner with organisations representing persons with disabilities to say, Green Climate Fund, is this inclusive? If it's not, here's how you do it. So please come and talk to us, hold us accountable for the changes we're making around knowing how much of our investment is making a difference on the ground, and please be proactive in working with us to make sure that the investments we're making are really inclusive and work for the most vulnerable members of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Moving from the world's largest climate investor to the Ford Foundation, another large foundation investing in social issues and has a long history in prioritizing disability rights within its work. Martin, we would love to learn more about the Ford Foundation's experience and how the Ford Foundation has can develop financing for more accessible development for people with disabilities and their respective organizations, but also what could be done to convince more philanthropic organizations to prioritize disability rights in their work.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a real privilege to be here today with all of you. And, you know, I think that if we are going to make development finance more accessible to persons with disabilities, the first thing that we need to do is to acknowledge that donor structures mirror the discrimination and stigma of society. So, and this is both at the technical accessibility level and about how we work. So we at Ford has been working very hard in the last 10 years or so to really make our operations more inclusive and accessible. For example, we are continually improving the accessibility of our website. And, you know, this is taking more and more work, but, you know, we are proud that all our videos since 2020 include captions and downloadable transcripts. We also have, in some cases, audio described versions. Again, we are trying to improve our website. We want to work to make all PDFs accessible. And, you know, this seems to be a small part of our operations, but it says, you know, it really helps us in making our work more accessible. But again, it's not only about the technical side, but also about substantive inclusion. So in that sense, we work with many disability grantees, but we also work in the many different ways at the intersection of disability and the other areas of work, like climate change, for example, or gender-based violence. One of the things that we have been doing in that sense, because it's extremely important for us in our partnership with disability communities, is always developing some kind of ad hoc advisory committee to, to engage the disability organization. So if we are designing our strategies, or if we are working about our communications, we are always doing this with these different kind of ad hoc advisory groups. And we actually develop a guide for other donors who may be interested in having advisory committees like this. And the other thing that we tend to do in a very systematic way is to really facilitate relationship building. For us, it is critically important to ensure that all our partners are talking to people with disabilities. So, for example, just to give you one example, when we were launching a new feminist fund with and for girls, we introduced them to disability leaders, including, for example, Women Enabled. And when they shared expertise, what came out of that exchange was definitely much better than what we originally expected. So to answer your first question, I think that the most important thing as we think about making disability finance more accessible is less about reaching out, and it's more about changing our own structures and practices. But if you're thinking about engaging with other donors, again, the key question here is not to start from a deficit or marginalization perspective. We really want to attract other donors, talking about the power and the agency of disability rights approach. For us, when we are thinking about working around disability, it's also about working to improve democracy. It's also an opportunity to ensure economic livelihood. Everything that we do is with the perspective that working on disability issues is having an impact that goes far beyond the disability movement. So for us, as we think about engaging with this with other donors. We want to engage with them from an impact perspective, from an opportunity perspective. And if I can share like a more like personal experience, I would say that at the Ford Foundation, one thing that has been that has made a difference is for everyone to see the opportunities and the comparative advantage of including people with disabilities in all our work, because the impact is much broader than we originally expected. So again, you know, the way we think that we need to engage other donors is not through the traditional narratives that put disabilities as something that needs to be addressed, but definitely as an opportunity for us to change in everything that we are working on.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think what you said about donor structures mirroring social structures is very insightful and very true, in fact. And that just tells us how much needs to be changed in the structures that currently exist within our societies. Last but not least, we have Dr. Felipe. Dr. Felipe, as the United Nations Youth Ambassador and the United Nations Youth Office has made investments in both youth and disability, including recent research to address data gaps on young persons with disabilities. How complementary are these agendas? And what more needs to be done to ensure development financing reaches and empowers young people and youth with disabilities?
Great, thank you. Just one clarification, I am not an ambassador. My personal background is definitely not in diplomacy. I'm a medical doctor by training, but the involvement in youth issues brought me to be at this role in the United Nations now on youth affairs. So first of all, I want to describe myself. I'm middle-aged, I'm brown hair, brown eyes. I'm wearing a suit with a flower tie. I think it's a bit more informal because I'm on youth issues. I have socks with avocado. So that's another detail. But I'm very happy to be here, and I would start mostly by recognizing all of you. I'm sorry I was a bit late, and I'm sorry I will leave a little bit early because this week is crazy and we're jumping from one side to another. But since the beginning and until the end, my colleague Manuela is on the room. She's our disability inclusion expert in the UN Youth Office, and she's the one that also makes these engagements possible on our side and all the work for our office to be involved in this agenda. But allow me to recognize in two persons I'm seeing in the audience, Silvain and Natalia. They come from very different regions. Natalia comes from my home country, Uruguay. Silvain comes from the DRC. But I think that in those leaders, I want to recognize all those organizations and allies that brought us into this moment, and also has brought like the Summit of the Future and the Pact for the Future to have language and recognition on disability inclusion. And that was not since the beginning. And if we are here at this point, although there is no formal pact yet, the draft versions are still including this perspective. And mostly, I think they're including the intersection of youth, gender, and disability. And those are three things that for us in the United Nations Youth Office are extremely linked. And I want to get a little bit on it. So the United Nations Youth Office is a very recently established mechanism. This was established by the UN General Assembly. So this means that member states, governments, using simple language for everyone outside the UN, governments, the 193 governments, decided that it was a moment to have a specific mechanism inside the United Nations to catalyze and to put in the center and to prioritize youth issues across the three pillars of the UN. You know, it's not the typical approach when it's about youth issues that we think that these are only development issues. It's understanding that youth issues are human rights issues, and youth issues need to be also in the center when we are discussing about peace and security. So our mandate is very broad across the three pillars of the United Nations. And of course, we have a structural role. We are not about implementing on our side. It's about how we can support this big platform, which is the UN, which brings together different kind of stakeholders, but mostly an intergovernmental structure where we have governments, and how we catalyze this agenda further. So for us, and this is because for many years before this office was established, disability inclusion has been a priority for the former envoys on youth. And that brought the former envoys on youth that were my direct predecessor, Ahmad and Jayadma, to start investing in understanding, okay, where we are when it's about the inclusion of young people with disabilities. And that's why our office, with the support of many other partners in the UN system and under the umbrella of the Youth 2030 strategy, which is the United Nations strategy to work on youth issues, developed data analysis to say, okay, where we are. And this report that we launched last year, going deeply and understanding where we are when it's about the inclusion of young people with disabilities, is showing that we are behind, but at the same time that we have many opportunities ahead to advance. But we cannot change what we are not measuring, you know? And that brings us into a second thing where we are now. So I'm happy to say here that we are working within also the Youth 2030 strategy on youth, specifically to develop a youth marker to understand how much the system is investing when it's about youth issues, but not how much one agency is investing or another agency is investing. Because our priority is, okay, how we can use this new office to unlock funding for youth issues. And unlocking funding is different to creating funding, you know? Because we already have many structures and funds that are already there. Our role is how to make those funds accountable for 50% of the population. Because young people are 50% of the population. And in the core of this unlocking funding, in the core of our youth strategy, in the core of this youth office, is the inclusion and the mainstreaming of disability inclusion. And I wanted to share that with you because I think it's crucial. You know, we are a very small office if you compare our office with other partners in the system, but we have a very important power. You know, it's our convening power. And we're here to support this agenda. So I'm here to say, count with the United Nations Youth Office, count with us. We have developed advocacy data also to move this agenda further, and we are here to support. And the only way in we are going to move this agenda further, and I don't know if many of you were able to join yesterday us in the United Nations for the opening of the action days on the pre-days of the Summit of the Future, but young people gave there a lot of strong messages to us. First, they gave us a message that youth issues are interconnected and are cross-sectorial. And youth issues are across gender issues. Youth issues are across digital inclusion, you know? Youth issues are across humanitarian responses, financial discussions. And they gave us strong messages about that inclusion is a big part of their priorities. So I invite you to join also these efforts, these common challenges we have, and definitely count with us to be an ally on this battle. And let's use this office, you know, let's use this platform and this convening power we have, you know. Almost everyone knows what's the United Nations, and I think that everyone understands what's youth. So let's use the power of this office in that sense.
Thank you very much. I think you can count on all of us being allies in this mission. I'm meant to wrap up and provide some summary of this discussion, but I know that we ran out of time 20 minutes ago, so I won't do that. But I do want to thank our panelists again for a very insightful conversation. Please join me in thanking them again for this very insightful conversation. Up next, we have a very interesting panel as well that would be moderated by Jose Maria Vieira, Executive Director of the International Disability Alliance. So please let's welcome Jose on the stage. Thank you again.
Thank you, Talia, and thanks to all the panelists from the previous panel for fantastic presentations and interventions. We are really behind schedule, so I'll invite all my panelists to really stick to the time that we allocated for each presentation. And it is clear that we can continue talking about financing for development, SDGs, Pact of the Future, but those conversations will never be productive or effective if we don't talk about where people live. All people with disabilities, people without disabilities, and that is in cities, in communities. We are all part of communities, and basically this panel will like to address some of the challenges and opportunities that we have when it comes to inclusive development at the local and community level. It is really an honor for me to welcome Sylvain Abodi from the African Youth Movement, Relly Rogers from Microsoft, and Bake Bailey from Accenture, who will be our panelists, and I'll be asking questions to each of them. But before doing that, I just want to thank the organizers of this event, the International Disability Alliance, the International Development and Disability Consortium, and UNPRPD for actually all of us coming together in the understanding that if we really want to push for a more inclusive world, we need to do it in partnership, and we really need to go outside our space trying to bring new actors. And I think this particular panel is the example of what we want to achieve, starting to talk to different people and actually bringing new actors into this conversation. So thank you very much, all my panelists. And Sylvain, the first question I have for you is, it is clear that when it comes to implementation of the SDGs and the CRPD, young people with disabilities have definitely concrete asks and concrete recommendations. So we just want to hear from you, what are the concrete asks and recommendations on how to make sure the younger or young people with disabilities can be included in the SDGs and at the local level. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question and for giving me the opportunity to speak here. That is a crucial subject, and today I want to highlight the setup which is needed to ensure the manifold participation nationally and globally. First, it's essential that we prioritize inclusive policy at national level. Countries must commit to integrate the voice of young people with disability into decision-making process that affect their life. This means creating platform for them to lead the conversation about education, employment, and healthcare, ensuring that our perspective shape policies that meet our unique needs. At the global level, strategic partnership should be establishing with the organization that represents young people with disability. This collaboration would facilitate the sharing of the best practices and the innovation solutions, allowing for more informed and inclusive approach across the region. In addition, we need robust training program for educators, employers, and community leaders to recognize and to remove barriers that don't facilitate the participation of youth with disabilities. This includes promoting the adoption of universal design principle that make public space, digital platforms, and service accessible to all. At the upcoming Global Disability Summit, I ask leaders to commit to first adopt a global framework that mandates the inclusion of young people with disability in all areas of policy making. Second, to set a clear target for funding program designed to empower young with disability, ensuring they have the key access to resources that support their active engagement in the society. Finally, we need to promote awareness campaign to combat stigma and misconception around disability, cultivating a culture of inclusion and recognize everyone's talent and abilities. In conclusion, the manifold participation of young people with disability is not only a right, this is predicts for a truly inclusive society. Together, let's be the champion of the change and commit to this critical step, because every young person, regardless of his ability, deserves a seat at the table. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sylvan, for reminding us of the key role that young people with disabilities can play, but actually for putting on the table a very concrete ask around the Global Disability Summit and commitments that we need to make sure are in place for young people with disabilities. I would now like to hear from Raylene Rogers from Microsoft. In general, new technologies and the new digital technologies are kind of part of our daily life. We understand that in particular for persons with disabilities, new technologies are important, but just one piece of our agenda and one element of social inclusion. But in particular, recently we have heard about, and we are living with more of interaction with artificial intelligence. And clearly, artificial intelligence is with us, is for us, and we need to make sure how we can make a good use out of it and how to make sure that really it's in line with human rights approach and the CRPD. So, Raylene, I'm wondering what you can share with us about the role of artificial intelligence from a human rights perspective and how we can benefit from this new technology in terms of advancing the inclusive development agenda.
I think we're good now. Thanks so much. It's lovely to be here this afternoon. It's really the right way to start that conversation. At Microsoft, we believe accessibility is a fundamental right, and that really grounds all of our conversations around technology. And it fits within our mission, which is to empower every person and organization on the planet. When you hear those two things together, it really is the business case for the fact that technology has to be accessible and include and meet the needs of everyone. So it's not a separate part of our business. It's not a separate part of how we're thinking about AI. It is incorporated in every part of it. We're 2 years in to this newest age of AI. We've had artificial intelligence since the 1950s, but we really started to experience and see the impact of large language models in the last 2 years. And it's a world, as you referenced, where people with disabilities are often the early adopters. We are using the technology because it is critical for accessibility in our daily lives. And we've started to learn in the early stages about critical positive use cases for accessibility. Some of you might have used them today or are using them as part of your lives. I know I've used them today. My note-taking for this event has all happened by AI, which my dyslexic brain is more than delighted with. But we're also seeing massive step forwards in terms of visual descriptions and how that's changing how navigation works and the increasing independence for many people who are blind or visually impaired. We're also seeing significant steps forward in voice to text, and we're seeing that get incorporated into infrastructure. There are now airports that take those, I will say, overhead announcements that can be a little annoying and create a text version of that so that it is accessible to everyone and you don't miss that gate change information if you don't have auditory access. One of my favorite uses of AI is the way it is unblocking access to accessible formats, in particular for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is a segment of the disability population that hasn't been as well served by previous advances in technology, but I have been delighted by the reality that now I can take anything that exists in the world and instantly create a plain language or easy read version of that and pair it with a built-in screen reader for somebody who might not have traditional literacy and give them equitable access to the same information. So all of that's pretty exciting, but there are real challenges. I think one thing that's important for us to be grounded in is that large language models reflect the world as it is. And the world as it is ableist, racist, and sexist. And that's a real challenge when we think about how do we red team and protect against accelerating those realities. I think another key piece that is foundational to the disability experience is that we are missing from the data, and that the data that is driving large language models needs significant more disability representation in it. And that's a place where we've been really engaged. I see some of our partners in the room in the World Bank and telling the data story. We've been engaged actually across the technology industry with our competitors to invest in better data representation of non-typical speech. Lots of ways that trying to close that data gap. I think another piece in this global conversation that we have to pay attention to is the real risk that AI could increase the divide. And if we don't address from the very beginning access and equity, we are going to accelerate some access and some people's moves forward and leave people out. And so attending to that has to be part of the conversation. So I'll leave us with sort of what can we do and what should we be doing right now. One is the idea that all things built with AI need to be built with accessibility by design. You mentioned universal design. This is the moment where disabled people can be creating and co-creating, where we need to hold the world to the accessible design standards to make sure that this technology is accessible to everyone. We should and can be using the power of procurement to not have a government or a system buy something that uses AI that is not accessible. And I think we also need to include the disability and community and center them in the discussions about regulations. I was pleased to see the progress that the Global Digital Compact has made to have accessibility in it. It's not everywhere in every place I wanted it to be, but it was steps forward. But I'm really wake up at night worried about the disability community not being as centered in the conversations about regulations, because there's a real risk that we could have a challenge where we create barriers to innovation, where we weigh the need to protect for privacy or security against the need for accessibility. We're seeing that right now in conversations about voice and individuals who need to use an AI voice to communicate. But those voices and that technology could also lead to deep fakes. And do we regulate in a way that prevents the individual from having that accessibility right? And I think that's an active conversation that we should all be involved in. I do think that there are positive signs in terms of the equity piece. One of the things that I'm excited about is that we now see how AI has allowed us to take some technology that had been online, like AI captions, and now have offline versions of that available in our Windows 11 product. So you don't have to be plugged into the internet to use accessibility features. And that kind of technology is going to create greater equity and access to accessible features. So I'm just excited to continue the partnership because all of our voices are going to be needed to ensure that disability is centered in this AI age.
Thank you very much. Not only for bringing to this room all the positive impact that AI can have on people's life, but actually for reminding us of, I think, something that especially Organization of Persons with Disabilities, we have been pushing for many years, and is kind of part of our DNA. And that is how we need to put persons with disabilities through their representative organization in the center of this discussion, and how even for this type of agenda that sometimes it can be seen as a fantastic opportunity for everyone, and that innovation is always important and good, but it is also very important to make sure that we are represented, that we are part of the discussion, and we are leading those discussions as Organization of Persons with Disabilities when it comes to regulation and other things. So thank you very much for that very important and balanced approach to technology and accessibility. So the last panelist, Becky, and thank you for being with us. One of the most important I would say instrument to make sure that we persons with disabilities we can live our lives, and we can live our lives autonomously and being included in the community, is basically employment and economic empowerment. And indeed, Accenture has done a great job around securing opportunities for persons with disabilities, and have worked with OPDs, especially at the local level, in making sure that those employment opportunities are human right based, but also putting OPDs in the center. So Becky, just wanting to hear from you about the experience from Accenture, and how we can continue this journey of including persons with disabilities in the labor market.
Wonderful, thank you. Wonderful, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone here today. I think I'd start with at Accenture, our purpose is to deliver on the promise of technology and human ingenuity. And it really makes me think of what you're doing at Microsoft to bring those things together to create new accessibility opportunity and economic opportunity as well. And I think about that a lot through the lens of employment. And I think for us, when we think about having, as a talent-based business, having the people that we need with the skills to unlock that purpose, we really need to cast that wide net. We talk about that all the time in business, but we know that we need those different experiences. We need people who've faced different life experiences and moved through them. We need their perspectives. We need their resilience. We need their innovation. Research that we've done with Disability In shows the business case. It's called the Disability Inclusion Imperative, and I encourage you to check it out. But just a couple of highlights from that. We found that companies that lead on key disability inclusion criteria have realized 1.6 times more revenue, 2.6 more times net income, and twice the economic profit of those who do not center those initiatives. Now, I've been asked to think about two facets at Accenture about how we accelerate inclusion, and I want to talk about how we accelerate inclusion internally for people with disabilities. One is culture and the work to build belonging for all. Two is structural, or how we remove barriers and create a barrier-free workplace. Three is people themselves, and how we invest in our people. And I would say there are two necessary prerequisites or enablers to this work. One is leadership commitment. It's non-negotiable. We have to have leaders at the highest level that are committed to this work. And secondly, we have to have the humility to listen. And that's listening to our people. It's listening to our advocates and communities, NGOs. This is how we get to nothing about us without us, is to listen and to bring in the voice of our people. For us, when I think about those three pillars, the culture change work, a lot of that is in training and education. And there's certainly the awareness building, but I also want to talk about all training at Accenture. We think about say leadership development training, like how you're going to become a leader at Accenture. That includes how to be an inclusive leader. We don't have inclusive leadership training over here and leadership training here, it's one thing, because our commitments mean that our leaders need to understand how to create that environment that allows everyone to thrive. We embed learning on disability inclusion in particular into standard training and into everything from ethics and compliance to that leadership development to how do you create more inclusive cultures and psychologically safe environments for everyone. I want to talk a little bit about the structural piece, and I think this is everything we think about. Certainly physical spaces and the built environment, but also digital spaces as well and tools. And within that, all of the practices or processes that companies have to go through for people to access those things. So a great example for us is accommodation requests. Every employer deals with these in some way. A few years ago, we found, that was something that we handled in a very federated, decentralized model. And what we found by listening to our people was someone in Brazil might request an accommodation and someone in the UK might request a very similar accommodation, and they would have two completely different experiences because they were run on a country level. Different offerings, different approaches, different budgets, everything. And so we took all of that input and centralized our accommodation process and built a center of excellence around it and leveraged technology to empower it so that anybody at Accenture anywhere has the same experience of accommodation. And then we removed as many of the false barriers in that as we could, meaning you don't have to have a diagnosis for most accommodations. You don't have to have doctor's notes, things like that. Anything that helps you focus, work better, unlock your potential, add value to the company, we want you to have that. And so removing all of the bureaucracy around that really accelerates the inclusion. I want to mention another piece that's both cultural and structural. We've built across the world in 48 locations across 25 countries what we call our accessibility centers. And these are spaces within our built environment that feature all of our assistive technology, assistive devices, and are staffed by concierge who understands how to use all these tools. And any person at Accenture at any time can come into an accessibility center and take a tour, and they can learn about those devices and technologies. And if they need a device or technology, they can try them out so that they can find the right one for them. It's not one ergonomic mouse, it's all the ergonomic mice, and use the one and find the one that works for you, right? This has been a game changer for us because not only has it really helped our people find the right solutions for them, but it's educated our workforce of people who do not have disabilities on the world of disability and ability. And it's been a mindset shift for our people to see that. And now we bring our clients in there too. Hundreds and hundreds of our clients have come into our accessibility centers to learn about this. Lastly, I'll just mention, as I run out the time, we invest in our people with disabilities, and we invest in their learning and career journeys, leadership development courses that are tailored for them, and not focused on disability with some sort of set of assumptions about the types of skills those people need to be successful. Rather, thinking about all participants, helping them to understand themselves better, understand the value that they're bringing, what's their value proposition, and how to communicate that to their leaders and teams so that they can be seen on equal footing, seen for the value that they bring, and help them accelerate their career journey by asking for what they need in order to be successful. I'm conscious of time, so I'll stop there with those few examples. Thank you.
Thank you to our three panelists. Thank you for all the contributions and interventions. I really want to invite everybody to do a good round of applause to our panelists again. And instead of me trying to wrap up this panel, I would just like to welcome the next panel moderator, Mary Keogh. And I guess that the best way that I can conclude this panel is by saying we need to transform all these discussions into action. And that is exactly what Mary and the other panelists will walk us through. So thank you very much. And Mary, welcome to the panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jose. And I hope everybody can hear me. Greetings from Dublin, Ireland, calling in late, but it's coming to 10 in the evening. So I'm also conscious you're finishing up a long session. So while the panelists are getting assembled, we will be speaking with Dr. Mohammed Lofty, who's the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities for sustainable development, Mr. Gopal Mitra, global lead for children with disability at UNICEF, and Mr. Monjrul Kabir, global advisor and team leader for gender equality and disability inclusion with UN Women. But before I go to my distinguished panelists, I just wanted to highlight the call to action that the International Disability Consortium, Disability and Development Consortium, and the International Disability Alliance are launching this evening. And it's very much around looking at how to galvanize for the future. And much of the conversation was about that earlier, but also needing to ensure that we're accelerating the SDGs. We have a number of years left for the SDGs of their lifeline. So what we've looked at is a call to action, and actually I think across all the panelists earlier today, everybody has touched on these various actions, but I might just go through them. There's 7 of them. The first one is adequate financial allocation to disability inclusion. We've heard that from colleagues from the Spanish government, from the European Union, and we've heard how finance is really critical if we're really going to give an uplift to disability inclusion. Strengthening representation and participation. I think that's come across very strong across all of the panels today. And again, within our call to action, the Nothing About Us Without Us call in terms of persons with disabilities, organisations, and also civil society organisations having a voice in what the future pact will look like. Accelerating progress on collating and using data and building the evidence base, very much touched on by most panelists about the importance of data. We're calling on action to transform systems and societies for disability inclusion. We've heard across governments, different stakeholders today, also private sector, UN agencies, and I think one of our colleagues spoke about this cannot happen in silos. It has to be collaborative where we all come together as partners. And our call to action really is about that, is about how do we really bring this into reality. Fully implementing international humanitarian standards. We also spoke about persons with disabilities at risk in terms of climate change, in terms of war and hazards and national hazards. So humanitarian standards are really critical. The last 2 then action points are around promoting innovation and knowledge generation. So our private sector colleagues are today speaking very much about how they're driving innovation around disability inclusion and also knowledge generation across the different banks in terms of the how learning platforms are sharing on how progress has been made and guidance. And then we're all here as well to speak about the Global Disability Summit and, you know, in terms of the concrete commitments that need to be made over the coming months in terms of the various different forums that will be held over 2025. So without further ado, I will go to my first panelist, Dr. Mohammed Lofty. Mohammed, question to you. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Yes,
okay.
As a representative. Do you want me to ask you the question? Yeah, as a representative of the stakeholder group on persons with disabilities, what action would you like to be taken to ensure the second point in the call to action on strengthening representation and participation of persons with disabilities is realised, and why is this crucial for shaping a better future for all?
Thank you, Mary, for this very important question.
Before I answer, I'd just like to clarify that my professional background is I am the Director for Capacity Building and Advocacy at the Global Initiative for Inclusive ICTs. I'm here speaking on behalf of the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities on sustainable development that I have the pleasure to be co-chairing with my colleague and friend, Mr. Jose Vieira. Well, to answer your question, Mary, to strengthen representation of persons and participation of persons with disabilities, there are several strategies and strategic steps that we have to maintain and make sure that we can achieve. The first one is to continue and build on the inclusive and participatory structure of the 2030 agenda and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And the second is to consult and actively involve persons with disabilities and their representative organizations in all decision-making processes to ensure actions reflect reality. This will accelerate for sure progress in eliminating multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, ensure more effective outcomes in climate change and disaster risk reduction, and provide more inclusion in the peace and security agenda of persons with disabilities. The next one is to establish systematic preconditions for inclusion for both disability-centered and mainstream programs and policies, and address the increasing digital divide that disproportionately affects persons with disabilities' lives by promoting accessibility, independence, and inclusion through assistive technology, artificial intelligence, and infrastructure. Particularly here, I'm referring to digital technology and telecommunication. The next one is to foster existing and established new partnerships, bringing together various stakeholders to exchange, increase awareness, and strengthen capacity of organizations of persons with disabilities to establish evidence-based policies for sustainable change. Then I would like to also add that it's important to invest in disability inclusive development and disability data collection, analysis, and use, and recognize citizen-based data to implement or to complement official statistics to address critical data gaps. In closing, I would like to emphasize that organizations of persons with disabilities must be the driving and leading force to make effective and sustainable change. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. The next question is to Gopal. Gopal, hope you can hear me. UNICEF has been pioneering the integration of disability segregated data into mainstream systems for a number of years now. From your experience, what more needs to be done to accelerate the collection and use of data, disability data, and how can this help to genuinely transform system and societies?
Thank you so much, Mary. And while much more work needs to be done to advance disability data, I would also like to take the moment to recognize that over the last past decade, there has been significant advances on disability data. One example is the Washington Group UNICEF Child Functioning Module, which has been integrated into key household survey mechanisms, resulting in the largest repository of child disability data in the world. We have much better idea of how children with disabilities are faring compared to the general child population across critical child well-being domains. 3 months back, an advanced data module on inclusive education was launched. To transform lives of persons with disabilities, it would require persons with disabilities to have equal access to services, support, and opportunities. And along with survey data, it is therefore foundational to strengthen administrative data systems, to ensure and track to what extent persons with disabilities are being able to access basic services and also plan on that basis. Disability management information systems have to be significantly strengthened. Data harmonization and sharing between ministries like education, health, labor, social affairs is fundamental. At the same time, we also have to track and measure accessibility, track and measure investment on disability, as was highlighted. The capacity of national statistical offices and data and management personnel within ministries have to be significantly strengthened on capturing data on disability inclusion. At UNICEF, therefore, we are not only supporting partner governments, we are also disaggregating data in our own strategic plan so that we know how UNICEF is supporting children with disabilities to access education or assistive technologies or humanitarian assistance. The new technology, the opportunities that new and emerging technologies provide also have to be harnessed. As was said before, we cannot transform something that we don't count and that we don't measure. And with tools that are already available and emerging, we have a fantastic opportunity to significantly advance data on disability inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjurul, thank you, Gopal. And you made the very important point about actually celebrating the progress that we've made. And I think that's something we also always have to think about. So thank you to UNICEF and all the work you do. Next question and last question is to Manjurul. Manjurul, UN Women have been leading the way on turning global commitments from the Beijing Declaration into action for women and girls around the world. What learning can you share with us on how to turn global commitments into practical action? And how can this help to shape a more inclusive future for women and girls with disabilities everywhere?
Thank you very much, Mary. I think 2 hours before Deputy Secretary General launched formally the anniversary celebration process and also the observation process of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Actions, the 30 years, which will happen in 2025. And there will be a dedicated UNGA event next year as well. But today, it is a formal mark. The reason being, the national review process have completed almost, and the regional review of the Beijing Declaration is happening now. Your point is very important because if you remember, and many of you know, in 1995, the Beijing Declaration actually pointed out 12 critical areas of action. And we recognize that these 12 critical areas, and I'm just reading out for the interest of everyone's knowledge, in women and poverty, education and capacity development, women and health, violence against women, violence and armed conflict, women and the economy, women in power and decision-making, institutional mechanism for the advancement of women, human rights, women and media, and the environment, girl, child. And all these areas, we recognize the disparity between, of course, men and women. That goes without saying, but particularly challenges for women and girls with disabilities. And one of the way that UN Women now together, because it's impossible for one organization to push this is a whole UN system response, and every single organization present in this, including bilateral, multilateral partners, OPD, civil society organizations, and private sectors are playing their role. But particularly, we identified actually 6 drivers, and that 6 drivers will be helpful for women with disabilities and the whole issues of disability inclusion. And I just want to mention these 6 drivers because we are highlighting throughout today's event the importance of peace and security agenda, importance of ending violence against women and girls, care economy and unpaid care work. This is one of the identified area where we don't think the care agenda has been disability inclusive throughout the UN system and beyond. Bridging the digital gap, and we're hoping that with this future pact and also the digitalization agenda, this will be prominent, and also linking economic empowerment to climate action and transition to green and blue economies. These are the areas we felt that both gender and disability through an intersectional approach can make tremendous progress And one of the findings that we have that there are a lot of commitments in the high-level political forum and different intergovernmental processes, but there hasn't been dedicated resource allocation. In June, during the COSP, one of the area we pushed as UN Women is the future of disability movement would be feminist. And I think in the same spirit, in the March of 2025, CSW, we would like to see the feminist movement would be much more inclusive, disability inclusive. And I think if these two movements come closer, the world will gain much more, including the whole youth movement that ASG Felipe that highlighted, because there hasn't been any other option but to integrate our resources. And one concrete example I just would like to offer at the end is the UN Women is introducing this year the disability marker, the D marker that our EU colleagues mentioned, and not only the D marker, based on our lessons learned from gender responsive budgeting, we are now pushing the agenda for gender and disability inclusive budgeting. I hope that together as a UN system, we'll do much better in terms of implementing this, and we'll hopeful that we'll present those examples in the Global Disability Summit as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Montreal, for giving very practical solutions and suggestions there. So I know I'm handing back over to the chair, I think to Ola. Just for the call to action, it's available on our websites, both the IDA and IDDCs, and we look forward to working with all stakeholders to make an inclusive, accessible, sustainable, peaceful future for all persons. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to welcome Jose on the stage so we can do quick closing remarks, I promise, because I know it's been already very long but very interesting session. So I just wanted to say in closing that on behalf of the Global Disability Fund, and I will give also the floor to Jose to do some quick closings. We are really very, very humbled with what we heard all this afternoon, because it's really very promising to hear that we have a lot to offer. There is a lot that has been discussed that we are not starting from scratch. There are a lot of key moments taking place next year and the years to come that we can't afford to miss disability from those discussions and commitments. So genuinely, we need to come together, and joining efforts is the only way forward, because siloed approach to disability has never worked, and that's why we need to come together around it. And on behalf of myself and the team, we want to thank you all for being here today, and we look forward for the upcoming milestones. We see the promise of working together, and that is a commitment from our end. And now I hand over to Jose to give his closing remarks as well.
Thank you, Ola. Thank you, Mary, and thanks everyone for being with us today. On behalf of the International Disability Alliance, the International Development and Disability Consortium, and the Global Fund on Disability, it is a pleasure, and I think we have learned a lot and exchanged a lot. But I really want to take 2 minutes to really reflect on what we need to do next, because I think every event of this nature really needs to make us think what we want to do or what we have to do. And if there is one word in the last couple of days that we have heard most frequently is future. Pact of the Future, Summit of the Future, Future Generation. And we really need to start thinking, what is the future of disability inclusion? And if we really want to get right the future of disability inclusion, for me, there are certain things that we really need to start thinking about how we are going to reconfigure the momentum that we have created with the CRPD, the SDGs, and many other things. And a couple of keywords that I think we really need to take note and carry it with us are partnership. We really need to rethink the way that we partner and how we are going to make a reality all what we say and always about putting OPDs in the center, putting OPDs in the driving seat. And that also connects to smart investments. We appreciate the investments made so far, but clearly it's not enough. But it's not enough only about quantity, but it's about how we invest and where we invest and who gets the resources to do the different activities. that also connects for me to another thing, which is we really need to keep investing in existing infrastructures. I think we have collectively achieved a good institutional infrastructure across the UN system, from the civil society, governments. So I think it's important now that instead of this human tendency of creating new structures, we invest in existing structures more and more efficiently. The last two things that I would say is we talk a lot about accountability, and it's very nice to say we want to hold ourselves accountable. We want to make sure that we have accountability frameworks. But I think we also need to reflect if we have done enough to make sure that when we talk about accountability, that is in practice and is across every single part of the disability inclusion agenda. From an OPD perspective, I must say that accountability, to measure accountability, we can only think how much resources OPDs get to implement all the programs and projects. And definitely, I don't know if we had good news about that. And the very last thing is that we really need to come together, reflect, and I think we tried to do this today with a fantastic level of success. And we hope that we can continue. And this is just the first of many events every year where we bring new players into the discussion. The disability sector and the disability inclusion agenda requires new players, new stakeholders. And the Global Disability Summit next year, it's one of the many opportunities that we also have to bring new stakeholders and better investment, more smart investment, and making sure that when we say nothing about us without us is a concrete way forward in putting OPDs and persons with disabilities in the driving seat and making sure that everyone in this fantastic journey of disability inclusion has a role and responsibility. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ola. Thank you, Mary. And thanks everybody for making this event possible.
Thank you, colleagues, and apologies that we didn't give the floor for questions, but now is the chance through the reception for us to connect to each other, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks a lot.